Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. Alan is my name. So, the story of Andor is one that's been told many times throughout cinematic history. What makes it so special was the fact that it took place in one of the richest cinematic galaxies ever created.
If you can't find it here, it's not worth finding.
When you make a Star Wars show or TV series, you have the added benefit of one of the most lore-rich franchises in all of human history. I mean, you have hundreds, if not thousands, of authors, artists, designers, video game makers who have basically filled in the entire galaxy with every little detail that you would ever need. This means Star Wars can be very overwhelming to people who are not familiar with this lore, and at the same time, it can be very overwhelming for people who even know the lore too well. Dave Filoni probably understands Star Wars better than any other creator right now at Disney. But that also can become a hindrance at times, and that's because he is painfully aware of every opportunity where he can insert a previous lore character into his existing stories because he knows it all. And while this is really great for hardcore fans who love cameos and fan service and all of the connections of his various works placed together, for someone who's not a huge Star Wars fan, who doesn't understand the lore, or someone who's just objectively looking at the story, well, it could become a little bit jarring, disjointed, the pacing might be weird, and so on. When we watch a show like The Mandalorian, it's like watching a grown man play with his action figures, and he's recreating every awesome scenario from his childhood in a live-action multi-million-dollar TV series. This is why everyone really loves it. The guys who create that show really understand the fans. But everyone else, including the critics and non-Star Wars fans, love The Mandalorian not just because of the lore and the cameos, but because Jon Favreau understands action and the hero's journey as well as anyone does. And this is the man who single-handedly saved Marvel with the Iron Man series. It's the combination of these two individuals, Dave and Jon, that makes The Mandalorian work so well. So what happens when you take someone completely different like Tony Gilroy and you give him a Star Wars TV show? Now, Tony Gilroy admittedly was never a big Star Wars fan, and prior to getting involved with Rogue One, he probably didn't know anything about the lore. This could have really gone wrong. I mean, you take someone who doesn't understand Star Wars and put them in a director's position for a Star Wars TV show. If they're lazy, if they don't put in the background research and work, it won't feel like Star Wars at all. But Tony Gilroy is sort of a perfectionist. I mean, his attention to detail is borderline obsessive. And you could take a look at how he started the production to really understand what his mindset was. During the screenwriting process, he had the production designers and executive producers in the room with him, which is kind of unheard of. But then again, every auteur has their own way of doing things. But this also means that from the very beginning, while they were writing all the episodes, Tony Gilroy already knew exactly how everything was going to look. And when it comes to Andor, it's all about the little details. You can see them almost everywhere, from the smallest cups on the table to the modifications that Cyril does to his uniform.
That's not worth staying up for, then I'm not worthy of the uniform.
To how the city of Ferrix looks clustered, second-handed, but also cared for. For instance, on Ferrix, you have a specific type of building. Instead of seeing sandstone buildings like on sandy Tatooine or prefab concrete bases on the sparsely populated Aldhani, where building supplies are probably limited, we have buildings built from bricks on Ferrix. Because while the people on Ferrix might not be the richest or most advanced technologically speaking, they take pride in their work and what they do. And so they lay bricks in their foundation, which is far more expensive than just pouring concrete. The entire manufacturing process of a brick is a craft all on its own. These are also salvagers, so they're used to reusing materials, and brick buildings can be torn down and the blocks can be reused over and over again. And of course, to tie everything neatly together, we have the Ferrix tradition of baking their loved ones into the bricks and then using it as a melee weapon to fight off the occasional authoritarian regime that might land on the shores of Ferrix. Everything has a purpose in Andor, so form actually follows function, which is nice. This means everything within the story feels realistic and organic. It's this kind of attention to detail and discipline that makes the actual storytelling process even easier, because The realistically grounded sets and designs help drive character action and behavior naturally, and it's this attention to detail that also helps craft, in my opinion, one of the most realistic portrayals of the Empire. It's not just some cartoonishly evil force here that serves as the story's main villain. Like everything else in Andor, the Empire is a living, breathing creature with many moving parts. The closer you look, the more you begin to understand how doomed it was all to fail. But before we continue, a quick word from our sponsor for today's video, saber.com. They have an amazing Black Friday deal which ends on November 30th. If you guys buy 2 of any of their lightsabers, you'll get $100 off automatically at checkout, and if you buy 3 of their lightsabers, you'll get $150 off your entire purchase. Now, for those of you who just want to order 1 lightsaber, you can use our promo code PORG, that's all caps, for 20% off. saber.com has an awesome range of different lightsabers, including their dueling sabers that are great for sparring and heavy use, along with their more premium and unique saber hilts and designs that are packed with all sorts of cool functions and sound effects, and they're also really beautiful to look at. Plus, sabers like the Xenopixel blade right here has a non-lethal option in case you have a bunch of Jawas trying to steal your shit. You can use the blaster mode. It's not an actual real blaster bolt, but it's enough to scare them away. We here at Generation Tech do not advocate the use of violence against the lesser sentient species of the galaxy. So guys, check out the description down below for more information about ownersaber.com. It's sponsors like this that help us stay independent of what the algorithm wants us to do, which are shorter and shorter videos. We do have those are on our shorts channel if you guys do want to check them out, but the long videos, the ones I like doing, they're here to stay. Now, oftentimes us lore nerds, when we talk about the Empire or the existing Star Wars lore, we oftentimes never get past the who did what and where phase. To truly understand Star Wars, you have to get beyond just the names and the locations, the size of ships, as cool as that is. What's more important is understanding how various elements of lore work and why things are built and designed in the way they are. This isn't the kind of stuff that you could just reread off of a Wikipedia page. It actually requires critical thinking. I mean, why does an Imperial-class Star Destroyer need escort picket ships? Well, it's because it lacks point defense weapons and has a huge blind spot on it. Or why do we see mixed Stormtrooper and Army Trooper units so much in Andor? Well, we'll get to that as well. And when tackling a galactic-wide society and government system, it's not just about understanding one of the systems, it's about understanding how all of these systems work together as one large machine. And herein lies Tony Gilroy's strength. His crazy focus on the small details on the world-building aspects of Star Wars helps him truly understand how the Empire works, because world-building isn't actually primarily for the audience. We as the audience definitely get to enjoy the results of world-building, but the world-building is first and foremost actually for the writer. It helps them guide the characters along. If you have a world that you truly understand, then it just becomes a playground for the characters you've designed. George Lucas was never the best storyteller. He was also famously terrible at directing actors and dialogue on screen, but no one can touch George Lucas when it comes to world building. I mean, we can all agree the prequels had some rough spots when it came out, but the world building was fantastic, and therefore the opportunities were there to, further and further build on the original story that George Lucas told and, make all sorts of novels, cartoon series like Clone Wars and everything, which is like everyone's favorite now. Even the sequels, as poorly received as they were, had some really amazing background lore and locales for the audience to discover and populate with their own stories. It's actually a real shame that so many people were turned off by the sequel movies that they didn't get to really understand the lore during this time period, which is actually pretty interesting. I would love to tell you guys a story about how the New Republic rapidly declined as partisanship began to paralyze the Senate, or how the First Order boldly skirted weapons sanctions to create one of the largest military forces the galaxy had ever seen that no one in the New Republic somehow saw. I mean, it's all pretty interesting. We've done old videos, I think, covering it, but it's just been a while. I mean, there's a whole 30 years between the end of the original trilogy until the sequels, and what we kind of see in the movies are just like the last few weeks of that era. Anyway, I digress. Let's stay focused. Let's take a look at how the story unfolds in Andor Season 1. Every character action here is driven by a full understanding of the world. Cassian Andor doesn't commit a murder for no reason. It's the corrupt Preox Morlana corporate force that is to be blamed.
They're in a brothel, which we're not supposed to have, the expensive one, which they shouldn't be able to afford, drinking Rivnog, which we're not supposed to allow.
Their corruption is a result of the Empire's top-down hierarchy, which heavily depends on the reports of local officials that tell them what the hell is going on in these backwater systems.
Minimizing the time the Empire spends thinking about Preox Morlana benefits our superiors and, by extension, everyone here at the Premor Security Inspection Team.
The Empire over the years have destroyed all of the institutions that are designed to basically act like watchdogs for local government, whether it's local media companies or advocacy groups. And so Preox Morlana, without these checks and balances, has deteriorated into a completely incompetent organization as a result.
They clearly harassed a human with dark features and chose the wrong person to annoy.
Which is why you get 2 corpo guards getting aggressive with Andor for hogging all of the hostess's attention in that strip club instead of 2 random thugs who, honestly, no one would have cared if they got, wasted. Cyril Karn, who we've done a lot of analysis on, is actually very rebellious in nature. He just doesn't really know it yet. He thinks he's an authoritarian, but he clearly has trouble following basic rules and orders and is constantly modifying his uniform. If you understand the character, and if you also understand the world, then you'll understand that Cyril Karn is not fit for a corporate security position, nor is he fit for working within the Empire, who only really cares about controlling people and turning them into numbers, basically. A bad amateurish writer will try to muscle through the story they have in their head without really thinking about how the world works around them. Tony Gilroy does it from a reverse perspective. Again, know the world, know the characters, and everything else follows through. And so obviously the second Cyril Karn, the rebellious officer, is placed in command of the Morlana security forces. He bites off more than he could chew, and suddenly he and Sergeant Tactical Blueberry have destroyed downtown Ferrix. Suddenly Chief Hines' rosy picture of security in the sector crumbles, and the Empire finds out. The production team for Andor understands that the Empire is not a rational actor. It's a cruel and despotic regime run by a crazy Sith Lord who is obsessed with power. And so instead of doing an audit and restructuring of the corporate security forces in the Morlana sector, the Empire just takes over everything. They don't care about the costs, the inefficiencies, they don't care about the cultural problems of taking core-word citizens and having them rule over people from the Outer Rim, essentially. And as we'll see later on, the result is that the Imperial garrison will completely underestimate the threat that the local Ferrix populace can present. We also see that even though the Empire's takeover of the Preox Morlana territory was supposed to be complete,
still a few Premor holdouts knocking in the office, helping with the Imperial transition.
Which makes sense, of course. Not even the Empire is dumb enough to completely rebuild everything from the ground up. They still really heavily depend on the previous corporate employees to help them basically figure out what's going on here. This also gives Cyril Karn a natural and believable way to find out about Marva's funeral, which is kind of brilliant. It's a lot more natural for Linus Moss to call Cyril Karn about this than having some unnatural plot device that is designed to move your character from one place to another. In the Aldhani raid segment, we have some more interesting lore building. Although the planet is sparsely populated, we find out that
Aldhani has the unfortunate quality of being close to nothing and not very far away from everything. It's the perfect hub for distribution if one were trying to take over the galaxy.
This one line introduces us to one of the main problems that the Empire faces, and that is the fact that their territory is massive and they face logistical challenges in every direction. This is also why they try to put their base not in a population center, but in this geographically convenient location. This means that the Empire looks at everything from a logistical standpoint, and they build this outpost in such a random middle-of-nowhere place because of that, which of course also follows the Imperial desire to control everything and do everything their own way. We're also introduced to the Imperial military garrison at this point in time, and it is made up of the Imperial Army, which is actually a very logical decision here, in my opinion. The Stormtrooper Corps is far more selective in how it recruits, and it focuses a huge amount of resources on ideological training for its members. The result is a much more political, aggressive, vanguard-style shock trooper force, which is designed for offensive actions and not, being posted in remote areas like Aldhani. And because this garrison was made up of more non-ideological soldiers, it gives us the opportunity to meet more balanced individuals like Lieutenant Gorn. The fact that we can see their faces and they're not wearing helmets also serves as a way to humanize these people. The gigantic sum of credits that the garrison is sitting on, well, it's the quarterly payroll for the entire sector, which further emphasizes the planet's role as a logistical hub. I think that's a really cool idea. I mean, they could have easily also said that Andor is coming here for a Sith artifact or some expensive stolen piece of technology like that Starpath unit, but no, they want all of the little details that kind of point towards one theme and one direction. The success of the Aldhani raid sends a ripple through the fabric of the Empire. Major reforms are made, and the ISB is essentially given unlimited powers.
I spoke with Emperor Palpatine last night. And he's assured me that the ISB will be taking the lead going forward.
Tony Gilroy, as we've mentioned in previous videos, admits to being an amateur historian. He's read a lot of different books and novels about the various human revolutions that have taken place here on Earth, and you can see like the influences of his research, pepper this story with a lot of realistic elements. Generally speaking, non-ideological bodies like the Imperial Army are far less likely to agree with crueler measures being used against the local citizens. And this is partly because Imperial Army troopers are generally conscripted from the local planetary defense forces from where they're posted, so they're locals. They're less likely to want to kill their own people. This is why Commandant J. Holt B. has to create an elaborate plan to move the local Donnies from their garrison site to another place.
It's a 10-day trek up from the lowlands. We offered them a transport because we know they'll refuse, but then along the way we've placed a series of comfort units. Shelters and taverns with cheap local beverages. Quite predictably, what began as 500 pilgrims at the bottom has already dwindled down to... Where are we now, Lieutenant?
We counted 60 last night, sir.
Yeah, he resents the locals, he's arrogant, but he's not like sending death squads after them, which is actually a big difference. Now, the more ideological groups like the ISB or Stormtrooper Legions, they would probably send out death squads and start using collective punishment.
Tribute tax equal to 5 times the amount stolen from Aldhani will be levied on any sector harboring partisan activity.
We see this kind of dynamic play out during the Ferrex Riot, where essentially stormtroopers are placed in positions behind the Imperial Army troopers so that they can make sure the armored troopers stay on task. Notice how the armored troopers also are using only riot shields and non-lethal stuff like clubs, which points to their less fanatic nature. And when an IED is thrown into the mix, it's just the stormtroopers who begin to gun down everyone with their blasters from the rooftop. I also really like this detail with the speeder technical here. Notice how the driver is an Imperial Army trooper. This reminds us that no matter how fearsome the Stormtrooper Legion was, it still heavily relied on other service branches for very basic things and support. It needed Imperial Navy ships to transport them to different parts of the galaxy, and needed Imperial drivers to pilot them around on the ground. The ISB and the Stormtrooper Legion were different from the Imperial Army, which was more loyal to the citizens of the Empire. The ISB and the Stormtrooper Corps, on the other hand, were loyal just to Emperor Palpatine and his political movement. And as the Galactic Civil War became a real shooting war, they would see their power increase, as well as Emperor Palpatine began to panic and try to micromanage everything. It's the Stormtrooper Corps that would arrest Andor on Nymos for no reason at all, and that's because they're more likely not to question their orders, which we found out now was more or less just an operation to round up street urchins that they could use as slave labor for the Death Star program. This type of order might not sit well with the local police or the local planetary defense forces. The ISB, while technically an intelligence agency, was not really designed to root out the enemies of the Empire, just the enemies of the Emperor, if you really think about it. It puts his own personal interest before everything else. This is why they were a part of Operation Cinder, which was complete chaotic nonsense.
I did not call for you, Commander Versio.
Vardos is our target?
One of them, yes.
Why? The entire planet and its people, they're loyal to the Empire.
The Emperor commands it.
Whenever the ISB arrived into a sector, immediately all authority would be redirected to them, no matter what the rank of the supervisor is. And at that point, basically, Emperor Palpatine's presence can be felt in that region. He's the one pulling the strings. In an effort to understand his own story and his own characters, Tony Gilroy's deep dive into Star Wars lore, which unearthed cool old concepts and renderings like the Cantwell-class arrestor cruiser, has been a blessing for this era of Star Wars. He's also managed to bring a lot of life back to the original trilogy era, which is very different aesthetically, politically, and thematically from the prequel eras, which has basically dominated everything for the last 20 years. And although Andor hasn't received the same amount of views and ratings as other Star Wars entries, the test of time will be kind to Andor. And that's because trends and flashy gimmicks, new technologies will always be replaced by newer, flashier trends and technologies. But really good, hard work, deep character dives, good world building, these kind of things that take a lot of time and effort, well, they will stand the test of time, and many future generations will be able to appreciate that aspect of Andor.